Welcome to this very interesting panel discussion, something that has been a very hot topic of late, considering that we're all in the middle of a pandemic. And one thing that all of us have been worried about, concerned about, and are looking at what the future lies is in digital health. And the topic for this panel discussion is unlocking India's digital health potential. With me is a very eminent panel. All the panelists are from the healthcare space and have some relation in the digital space. So let me just introduce all of them to you. We have Mr. N. Basita from MediBuddy. I have Ajit Naran and from MFine. I have Abhinav from PharmEasy. I have Atanu Roy from Biocon Group, who's just going to join us in a minute. I have Mr. Ramasubramani Ganeshan from Porsche, and I have Mitresh Agarwal from Google. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today for this panel discussion. Just to give you a little bit of a context before we begin, when you look at the whole digital healthcare market, it's pegged at about $116 billion. This is the kind of potential that digital healthcare has in the market. This is a figure of 2018, and this is poised to hit about $485 billion. And that's because it's been growing at a CAGR of about 27%. I want to begin by asking you, Mr. N. Basekar, about the kind of potential that digital health has as far as the overall ecosystem is concerned.
Thanks, Priya, and hi everyone in the audience. And yes, I think it is a very exciting time to be in digital healthcare space. And at MediBuddy, over the past 5 years, we've been making long strides in terms of getting digital health access to large number of customers, right? And in the recent past, of course, with the pandemic, there is also increased awareness among a lot of people, and we are definitely seeing a good push happening in digital health, right? And in a vast country like us, where there is significant population spread across a wide geography, speaking multiple languages, and in general, being still a developing country in terms of economic strata, there are different sections of the society living together in the same country. It is digital health that can bring or bridge these gaps at a rapid pace, and we are already seeing both at MediBuddy and out at large in the world as well. Increasing adoption of digital tools, not just among users and patients and consumers, but also among doctors, practitioners, the entire ecosystem of stakeholders who are involved, including governments. The public-private partnerships have increased in the past year or so in a significant way. So that's showing great shoots for digital health.
When you talk about the whole digital healthcare space, there are two categories or two segments within the digital healthcare space that have been seeing a robust growth over the last couple of years. One is, of course, M-Health, and the other is telemedicine. And when you talk about telemedicine, I want to talk to you, Mr. Ganesan, about the kind of growth that Porsche has seen, considering that telemedicine has become the go-to aspect at this point in time.
There's an interesting aspect when it comes to the impact of COVID on telemedicine. I think when we started last year, at that time, we were still figuring out, teleconsultations, how they work. Once COVID hit, interestingly, since we are in the home healthcare space, we were one of the first to started doing home isolation management remotely. So we would have a set of healthcare workers who would use technology to connect with all the patients allocated by the various governments who were COVID patients at various levels in terms of their symptoms, but they were at home. And we could scale that up to, I think we probably managed over 2 lakh patients in the time, purely using a mix of technology and our ecosystem of healthcare workers. There's no way we could have done that. Now, the way we were able to do that is because the patients were also in a mindset that enabled them to benefit from the kind of guidance and support we could give them. It was a mix of both the healthcare workers and doctors, depending on the level of symptoms they were showing, the kind of needs they had, the kind of guidance they needed. In some cases, we would guide them to mental health teleconsultations as well, all of which was probably unimaginable before the COVID outbreak started. And I think around that time also, we had the government introduce new rules to make telemedicine a lot more easier and smoother to do. I do remember before that, there were so many questions, so many open areas as to what's legal, what's not legal, what works, what doesn't work. But I think having those protocols defined by the government helped a lot. And I see that continuing because people are now also over the earlier it used to be, should I contact a doctor online? How do I trust that? Can they really help me? Obviously, there are still areas where you need a physical visit, but I think people are also realizing that not everything needs an actual physical visit. There are benefits from online as well, and I think this is a cusp. I think we need a long way to go, definitely, but the future is right over there.
Mr. Ajit Narayanan, I want to talk to you about what kind of pockets within the digital healthcare space do you see as the biggest drivers, or perhaps could be the big, growth drivers for the future. If you could run us through some of the aspects that you find could drive growth in this space.
Telemedicine is of course, one of the sectors that will see a massive growth, we believe. But the other touch points of, let's say, digitally accessing diagnostics and medicines will also see significant growth in the coming days. There are other aspects, slightly, as fundamental platform pieces, which will also see growth. Which is usage of health records and things like that, which form sort of the foundation layer of digital health to really take off. I think that will also see quite a bit of movement. The good thing is that today, where India is, I think we are at a stage of no digitization at all. So anything and everything that moves up from here is going to be a massive growth that we are going to see. And I think compared to the West, I think we'll probably take bigger leaps. And we'll see digital health actually penetrate much faster and much deeper into the grassroots that we can possibly imagine. So that's my view on this.
Mr. Agarwal, I want to come to you at this point. When you talk about digital health, there are a lot of opportunities as well as challenges. But the big question is India ready to really take on this entire digital challenge, considering that healthcare has been a big, issue in terms of plugging infrastructure gaps, within the overall healthcare system. So what kind of gaps do you think that the digital healthcare will play as far as the overall healthcare system is concerned?
Thank you, Priya. And first of all, hello to all the panelists. Thank you for, taking the time, and really appreciate you doing this, right? It's 1 hour of you not taking care of patients and all the healthcare. So really appreciate that. Priya, to your question, I think we've seen massive challenges as well as at the same time, therefore huge opportunities to innovate. So whether you look at, things around drug discovery, the way everybody in the last 1 year has accelerated vaccine research as a very good example of that, right? I think a lot of that is aided thanks to technology. Massive examples around that. We have, for example, a Canadian biotech startup, who said that they're going to accelerate drug discovery and time to market for, essential drugs by 5x, right? So that's like great, stuff on great research and, movements that have happened there. The second part of all of this is, how do you therefore take these drugs and medicines out there, provide better healthcare? How do you provide better patient care? Right? How do you then make sure that you do the second consultation, complete the loop, and really look at the patient, if I can crudely call it like a consumer, how you'd like to make sure that you really take care of them with healthcare as its core. So what we've seen is that there are a number of opportunities across the board, right? In India itself, as we know, we have the Uber pattern of national health stack, which clearly over the last 1 year has played a very, very important role. And it's played an important role with respect to whether there are government or private apps and platforms on the consumer app side, or whether there are health provider apps or platforms, on the other side. And then how do you make sure that there is the, open health services network, which is making sure that the market players are really interoperable? How do you make sure that the teleconsultation that a couple of panelists spoke about, the pharmacy folks, the diagnostics folks, the OPD, the inpatient, and the core fiduciary data, all of that is able to talk to each other seamlessly? How do you make sure that there's augmentation that happens? How do you make sure that, the electronic registries, the PHR and EHR, the claims when it comes to, let's say, the insurance part of this, How do you integrate with Ayushman Bharat? How do you integrate with the e-vouchers? So what we've seen is, this whole space absolutely open up so much, and there's so much of more focus in the last 1 year to make sure there's a lot of integration around this. And of course, we'll speak through this, panel around the number of technologies that are helping there, what Google is doing. Just to give you a couple of examples that I do want to highlight about what Google has done in this space. One is with Verily, that you may have heard of. The other is really Google and Apple, decided to partner and came up with an open API standard for COVID contact tracing using mobile phones. So many of you may have heard of that, and we've completely open sourced that. The other part is that we really do a lot of breakthrough work with DeepMind, which is our AI research arm, where we really started talking about AlphaFold, which solved a 50-year-old problem of understanding protein folding. And this is foundational to understanding diseases, as we all know. In India, specifically, there's a very interesting example of working with Arvind Eye Care Hospital, for example, to deploy AI models to provide eye care to people in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And to Ajit's earlier point, right, this is going to become the norm, and we perhaps leapfrog as a country several Western nations as well.
Right. I want to come to you, Mr. Roy. Do you think digital healthcare is at an inflection point in India? Where is it headed from here, according to you?
I would talk also from a pharma industry perspective, because I come from the other side. I will be talking from Biocon's perspective and in general for other pharma industries. So, when the COVID happened and what we were seeing in the pharma, that if doctors don't practice, then we will not have new patients or there would not be any treatment. So how do we, our products would not be required in the market, or we will not be able to supply just because the doctors are not practicing. So in the month of while, we had been struggling for telemedicine for years together. Month of April, we had a huge increase. And when we talked to doctors, they said that, we are going to use this. And but then there was the thing that when things becomes normal, they wanted to see patients face to face. But the habits had changed. And while many doctors wanted that when things becomes normal, they wanted to see patients face to face. That is the right way to treat. But there are significant number of doctors for second opinion and for where patients wanted to consult at a distance, and access to the doctors became much easier through telemedicine. So that definitely becomes a trend, which is, it is an idea whose time has come, and it is going to continue. Though when things become normal, doctors would obviously like to see patients face to face. However, we saw significant improvement in the solutions which the telemedicine and the digital health platforms provide. The maturity of the solutions have increased manifold, and thanks to the AI capabilities which has come in, and multilingual capabilities, vernacular languages, so the telemedicine and with also the video conferencing facilities, everything tying together, it becomes very useful. From a pharma company's perspective, while this becomes more as a distance, we are not directly involved in the telemedicine, but extension of this is an important part for us from a demand management perspective and demand shaping perspective, and aligning it with the supply chain. We did also extend similar solutions when we were connecting with chemists and with distributors, almost and on the similar lines. So I think from a pharma industry, one is that in general, I think the telemedicine platform and digital health platform is going to only increase. The sophistication is going to improve. This will at some point of time also there will be platforms available, or people will extend the platforms where e-detailing or practice management, with the detailing part which pharma companies do, they would have some way of linkage which is going to happen. The practice management solutions as such are getting provided as of now, so that would come in, and this will also have a linkage with supply chain part of the pharma companies going forward.
Right. I want to come to you, Mr. Abhinav. Farm Easy may have had good business over the last couple of months, considering that a lot of people have been ordering medicines. But within the entire portfolio and the gamut of medicines and the portfolio that you operate, which are the specific areas where you saw traction across? Because I think e-pharmacy has become a very hot topic, and everybody wants to get into the e-pharmacy space at this point in time.
See, again, in a slightly weird way, right? COVID was kind of a wake-up call in context of our country. We are a very big setup, 1.3 billion people. There are only a million registered practitioners, and if you do the math right there, right, you have for 1,000 people, you have about 0.67 doctors. That's the state of affairs, right? Uh, so the intervention of technology was inevitable. It had to happen. It was just a matter of time. The only good thing that happened as part of COVID is that people woke up to the idea of involving technology in healthcare. If you look at the last 2 decades of India, almost every frontier has seen disruption with technology, be it commerce, education, finance, travel, tourism, food. Everything has seen disruption except healthcare. It's just ironical and slightly weird. It needed perhaps an intervention like COVID for things to shake up a bit. Unfortunate, but that's perhaps the only good outcome from COVID. And so that's what we saw. Last year, around the same time the lockdown was announced, 23rd March is when the lockdown was announced, and suddenly the entire supply chain across the country came to a standstill. Practically everything was just stuck. We were unable to run for just 2 days. We were back up and running in just 2 days because of the deep digital infrastructure that we had built across the length and breadth of the country from a supply chain perspective. And in about 2 weeks from then, as in towards the early April timeframe, right, the third-party distributors, etc., who work very closely with us, they were back up and running. When at the same time, people who were not really using technology at their core, they were still not able to run their operations even after 6 weeks, 8 weeks of the lockdown, right? And that's the power of software technology. In a country where you have this huge disparity, 1.3 billion people, a million doctors, about a million retailers, and some 80,000 odd distributors. It's an extremely fragmented segment, but it's not discretionary. It is needed. Healthcare is not discretionary. Everybody needs it. And the only way to crack that was to have a solid presence of technology across all of these legs of the supply chain, and that's how we saw it. And of course, a lot of people made use of the medicine buying capabilities, but people use diagnostics, people use teleconsultation. The doctors network that we had, who were generally averse to the idea of using technology, unfortunately, their practices came down to almost zero in that period of 6 to 8 weeks, and they were constrained because they could not even open their clinics. Even if they opened clinics, no patients were turning up, right? So gradually, they started opening up to the idea of teleconsultations. We saw a lot of traction on our platforms from that perspective: video consultation, teleconsultation. The government swung into action as well. If you see, the teleconsultation was in the gray area for the longest time, and in about 4 to 6 weeks of the whole lockdown situation, the whole thing was formally recognized, and there were proper guidelines shared by the government. It had been stuck for almost 4 years.
I want to come to you, Mr. N. Vasikar and Mr. Ganesh, and I want to talk to you about the kind of, while we have spoken about the kind of accessibility that is there as far as the whole digital health infrastructure is concerned, both in terms of affordability and quality, I want your views on how far are we on this spectrum of affordability and quality? And Mr. Investigator, you can share your views.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Priya. And just to echo on the points, being digital was the only option to solve for access problems, right? You cannot overnight double the number of qualified doctors to treat patients, and even if you can, getting doctors to go and service across the every nook and corner of the country is also going to be a challenge, right? So digital has to be the only solution, and people, both the stakeholders in the healthcare community, providers, as well as the consumers or the patients, have woken up to this reality, which is a good starting point. Second, just because of digital means across industries that Abhinav briefly mentioned, there has been cost advantages, right, brought in by just digitizing processes, digitizing supply chain, digitizing records, tracking. Just some of this definitely improves. And in healthcare, there is a lot of associated costs, right? It's not just the doctor fees or the cost of a medicine or a cost of a treatment. There is a cost of the travel. There is a cost of people maybe losing days of work because they are unwell, and these are the associated costs that will immediately come down for sure. And with better access, probably the waiting times will definitely reduce. People can better plan their days, and there is a wider set of affordability, not just with just like say the cost or the fees of a consultation, let's say. So affordability definitely is coupled by access also. But what's more important is interesting is in many businesses or industries, just monitoring, being able to measure something improves quality on its own, right? It creates either competitiveness, it creates openness in terms of what an industry has to offer, and so on. Whereas that has definitely opened up now, right? With analytics and data, you could see, hey, how different doctors across specialties or within a specialty, across geographies, or between different times of day, or for different symptoms, how different doctors treat. And that's a huge repository of information, real-time information in some sense, that was as well unavailable. So it's again, just having this information provided back to the medical community, with the right amount of intervention in AI technology, concising this information back to our providers will over time improve the quality of care for sure.
Mr. Ganesan, you want to come in here?
Yeah, I think definitely what we spoke about, technology helping scale, right? That's, I think, pretty key in terms of how we bring down costs. That's one. But I think what's also going to be more interesting is that technology by itself doesn't really solve a lot of things. I think it's how do we find the right mix between technology and the human interface, making sure that the right people get the right support at the right time. Often at times what happens is the cost issue is not just a direct cost issue, it's also the lost opportunity in some cases. Does every person who potentially needs a doctor, are they getting the right level of support, and especially at the right time, because that right intervention helps make sure that the time you spend recovering gets cut a lot. But often at times, just in, I think, the way Abhinav was mentioning earlier, given our current ratio between uh, primary healthcare providers and the actual population needs is starting from right over there. There's a huge gap. So I think bridging the right from the primary healthcare aspect, using technology to scale that out, going to be very critical. What's also going to be interesting is as things are opening up now, I think we are also seeing that people are slowly going back to old ways of doing stuff. Obviously, we were at a extreme when we were in the lockdown phase. The question is, how do we build on some of those gains now and create a new paradigm which gets a right mix? Otherwise, we'll soon, there's a chance that, while people have opened up, maybe there's also this ease factor. So it's very essential that using technology, we also make it easy and not just a way to receive services. I think that all these things combined would probably have a significant impact, both from a accessibility and a quality perspective.
I want to bring in both Nitesh Agarwal and Ajit Narayanan here. I want to talk to you about the kind of role that new technology and emerging models of technology are playing to tap this kind of gap that's there in the digital health space. So if you can elaborate on all the new technologies or emerging models that are helping shape this entire digital ecosystem.
Fundamentally, I believe there are two areas where I think where technology, two elements of technology which will play a big role, right? One is mobile, and when I say mobile, it is mobile as the phone and the mobile as the infrastructure that we have in the country. I think this is going to be one of the biggest factors. It's going to be an enabler. It is going to foster a lot more innovations on top. So think of it like the roadways that you have today, right? It enables transports and e-commerce, etc., to happen on top of it. So I think the foundational backbone of mobile and the mobile, the network plays that extremely important part. To give you some examples, today the mobile is a powerful computer, more than any powerful computer we would have probably seen in our growing up days, that's sitting in the palm of your hand, right? There is amazing things that you can do with that power. Just as an example, just 3 weeks back, we launched a pulse oximetry solution on the mobile using just the phone's camera and the flash. Now, why this is important is because now you suddenly can take a simple tool like this and put it into the hands of 500 odd million people that have mobile phones today, right? Mobile and mobile network is there for us to use, and that becomes, like I said, the roadways. And these technologies now start to bring in these innovations where you put simple digital tools in the hands of people. Of course, if you ask me, is it as accurate? And it's not a 99% accuracy solution, etc. But still, I think it starts to pave way in this direction, right? That's one that just a start. But imagine trying to get into that space. Imagine if you could, sort of protocol enable the best cardiologist the way in which he treats patients, and imagine you could do that. Today you can dream about it, and I think in a couple of years probably it will also become real, right? So elements of it, you can start to make it accessible to a lot of people. It might seem like a little bit of far-fetched thought at this point, but I think these are two areas. The combination of this is going to be very powerful, I believe, at least in the primary care setting, and that's where we believe the biggest impact is going to come from these two elements of technology.
Mr. Agarwal?
Great points there made by Ajit, right? And I'll add a few more because we have a fairly, wide panel, right? We've got Biocon on one side, and we've got, folks who go out there and sell medicines, and folks who are in between, and so on and so forth, and a very wide audience out there. So the way I'd like to divide this is maybe 5 points. The first one is that if you own the healthcare data or the patient data, because maybe you provide a healthcare service like a hospital or a diagnostic center, in my mind, the technology that you should care about is how do you monetize it with consent, right? How can you provide other value-added services with partnerships? I think that's what those folks care about a lot. The second is if you sell a product as a pharmacy or an e-pharmacy or care packages and so on, the point to ask really is how do you increase the wallet share of healthcare spending, right, by providing the right recommendations at the right time. And that's where, to Ajit's point, AI plays a very important role, right? So, there's a lot of, for example, if you're buying a painkiller, right, it's highly likely that, you perhaps need an antacid along with it, right? So how do I make sure that, I can give you that package, and recommend that? Now, of course, if it is something which is a prescription drug, you can't take those recommendations. But for a lot of over-the-counter drugs, right, and that's a fairly large market as well in India, right, where there's over-the-counter, which is very, very big. So how do you use AI for that too? If you sell a wearable, and let's say you have an app, how do you incentivize customers to engage or patients to engage more and more with your platform and share their wearable data in exchange for better premiums, right? Proactive healthcare intervention. How do you expand from like a healthcare to fitness and care, right? And we are seeing a lot of the health insurance players, for example, do that. If you are a TPA or an insurance player, how do you improve profitability? By reducing manual intervention. So you start talking about straight-through processing out here, right? If you are a healthcare platform, how do you provide convenience at all customer touchpoints? So really for me, all of these could be questions, right? Now, we're moving from patient experience really, right, to patient empowerment. That's the world that we're moving towards, right? And I think that there are a few technologies that are going to be very important from an India context. The first is, the first answer is how do you adopt standards? How do you use standard APIs, right? So that you can do contract tracing, you can do monetization surface, and so on and so forth. So I think the healthcare API ecosystem is going to be very critical in India. The second part is how do you create multi-party federated data exchanges? Because security in healthcare, data, privacy in healthcare is a very, very important area. And I think India has a lot of strides to make there, right? The need to know or the access to the right party post consent is very, very important. The third is especially, for the, e-pharma players and so on, right? In terms of delivery, what's very, very important is how do you build a great user interface? And that's where I think earlier there were points made around how does vernacular help? How does the visual part help? How does the voice-enabled integration help? Maybe integration to a Google Assistant, right? An AI-based assistant. Two more points there. How do you extend the convenience beyond the app, right? Things like scheduling, alerting that you have to, take a medicine at a particular time, maybe a map to direct a user to a particular facility for vaccination. How do you integrate with wearables? And with Google's acquisition of Fitbit being complete, right, there's a lot of work that we're doing around that. And finally, to Mr. Roy's point out there, if you are, in the business of, making medicines, research, and so on, how do you optimize supply chain? How do you optimize demand forecasting, inventory forecasting, last mile delivery, last mile sample collections, and so on, right? So this is a very, very vast area. And healthcare is fascinating. And I see a number of technologies. If I can crystallize it, it's API, it's data, and AI, right? I think the combination of the three of these with an underlying layer of security is going to be where I think, a lot of technology work will happen in healthcare and life sciences.
I want to ask you about how you're using technology for demand forecasting, because considering the fact that medicines could be in short supply, there could be pockets where there is an increased demand. So one as a manufacturer and one as a seller, how is it different from both your perspectives? Mr. Roy, you can begin.
Before I go to this question, I just wanted to put some context on what Mr. Agarwal was saying. And, there is another use of technology which we think AI and ML would be greatly beneficial for various doctors, to increase their efficiency and productivity. When they are writing prescription, they're learning from their prescription. All these telemedicine and health platforms would help them treat patients much better, and they learn from their past behaviors. And also there could be learning from other peers which will come in. That is one thing. It would extend the skill sets of, augment the skills of various medical practitioners, which is going to be a very important thing in India compared to many other countries, because so a not so senior doctor can start functioning as a more experienced doctor using the AI ML capabilities, which will help. Also, from a pharma industry perspective, we are embarking on various apps which are primarily geared towards helping the patients to get a better experience. For example, we have products on insulin, and we want to personalize the insulin dosage which people take, and that is where again personalized medication and dosage and personalizing medicines is something where AI, ML, and the new technologies would be significantly beneficial. It is going to reduce the amount of insulin, or at the right time, people will be able to take the right doses, which was not possible earlier. It was an approximate amount which was given to different patients. So these are two important things which is going to help patient outcomes to be reached much earlier. Now, coming to the point of the supply chain and the demand forecasting thing, which your question was, Priya. was when we integrate our systems towards various institutional customers like hospitals and also large chains. That is where we get more feedback, and online platforms. That is where we get more feedback on the much faster feedback on what type of products are getting consumed, so that replenishment of the products happen much more efficiently. You have to keep in mind that many of the pharmaceutical products are on cold chain. Like, for example, we have cancer products, insulin, they are expensive products, and they also have an expiry date. And there is no point having the product in Bangalore and it is required in Guwahati. So it is also the distribution, efficient distribution, which is very important. So efficient response from the points of consumption, which to a large extent, when we integrate with hospitals and the platforms, various digital platforms for which has come up, are going to be extremely helpful from a demand sensing perspective and replenishment and distribution. And that is what we are trying to do.
Right, Mr. Abhinav, two takeaways from Mr. Roy is personalization and, of course, getting the medicines to consumers and patients wherever they are on time, in the right, being at the right place at the right time. What, according to you, will be the key, perhaps the key aspects that you would take into consideration when it comes to forecasting for demand, and
Right.
any
So
key trends that you've noticed?
right. So, like Mr. Roy said, right. So, if you rewind, let's say, just 5, 6 years, you don't have to go back too far, right? If you just rewind 5 years, uh, the entire setup was offline. I mean, the feedback loop to pharma manufacturers, to retailers, to distributors were basically all offline, right? So your salesmen will submit the monthly report basis that you'll figure out, how much sales you have had in a particular region and so on and so forth, right? As I said, technology is inevitable. It's a very disconnected ecosystem that we have. So our doctors are prescribing medicines where actual demand origination takes place, right? I mean, a patient does not decide what medicines they want to consume. It's actually the doctors. By the way, this is the only industry where this happens. There's no other industry where a third party decides what you consume, right? And that entity happens to be non-digital, or happened to be non-digital earlier. They are now moving towards digitization. Similarly, if you go back to the retailers and the distributors, they are again non-digital, disconnected entities. There are, as I said, about 1 million retailers in our country, about 100,000 distributors in our country, and again, they are all distinct islands. So what has happened over the last 4 or 5 years is that because of the penetration of internet and digital technology, these distinct entities have started to come together, and in almost real time, you have a visibility of what's in demand in a certain area. So not only you are using those signals to uh, predict and project what could be in demand, you are using those capabilities to build more intelligence in, let's say, the doctors network. So what happens is that you can get early signals of a potential epidemic because of almost real time access to symptoms and data, and the prescriptions and the medicines. So the game is changing dramatically, and in the last 4 or 5 years particularly, it has changed significantly, and we've been keeping up with these developments, right? So we are incorporating these things in trying to kind of come up with a better model of demand. I mean, same thing during the lockdown. Suddenly, the demand spiked. I mean, there was a jump of almost 10x in the demand. No supply chain could really be prepared for a 10x demand in supplies, but we were able to recover from that in about 3 weeks. So by mid-April, we were able to come back to normalcy from a supplies perspective, because we were able to react very quickly. The models were able to react very quickly to the signals that we got from the market, right? So this is evolving very, very rapidly, and the traditional ways of getting feedback from the market to figure out demand, they will very soon disappear. Maybe in the next 5 years, you would have everything digital from a demand prediction perspective.
You're talking about digital and the kind of future that it holds. I want to bring in Mr. Ganesan. You're talking about, the National Digital Health Mission. Do you think this is a step in the right direction? Is it premature? What more can be done according to you?
I think, see, if you notice when over here, when we're all discussing how technology helps, we're all focusing on individual silos at some level. There's some interconnection between them. But I think Abhinav probably touched on it very nicely when he said these are all interconnected entities. Unfortunately, we don't have an ecosystem today. I mean, at some level, it now reminds me of the cartoon that all of us might have seen some time back. But the fridge realizing that it's run out of food and ordering food for you from the internet automatically. But at some levels, when we talk about pharma or medical needs, there is an ecosystem which is developing which can get us. I mean, that's pretty creepy to think about that, somebody pre-ordering medicine for us. But I think at a level where we can get these ecosystem connected, be it the doctor, be it the medicine, be it your paramedics, linking them all together in a way where there is a common ecosystem that people can tap into, which gives a maximum benefit to the patient. I think a lot of us right now are also looking at the data as a very key mantra for us. It's our trade secret almost, but using which we do stuff. But reality is that the data belongs to the patient, and we are offering the patient medical services through that particular modem. So how do we do that? I think the national mission is a great step in that direction, and I think it's just a first step to get over there. What I'm hoping is that soon, maybe in another 5 years, 6 years, a little more than that, as we get more and more entities online, more and more electronic records in place, we have got information about people's usages shared of their own volition, which we can use to up the quality of care that we can give to them. I would definitely think that's something that's upcoming, something in the right direction, but probably we are still in the very, very early stages right now.
Mr. Enbasiter, what's your view on the same?
No, it is very much right. It is a complex ecosystem than most industries, right? And the way of delivery is different. But finally, at the end of the day, for the individual or the consumer, they want their health to get better, right? It doesn't matter that I need medicine delivered from a complex supply chain, or I have to talk to a doctor online or at a hospital, or I have to take a medicine. These are all means to a better health, right? So all this being integrated would definitely simplify the life of individual, I would say, in terms of taking care of their health. And technology is again one key means, right? But it is important to bring together all these various ecosystem players. Standardization is is going to be very hard. Honestly, it's an unsolved problem across the world. So we have to find our own means and ways to get there. But it's going to be very critical, right? So for me to have this integrated ecosystem of digital health information, personal health records is going to be very critical.
Mr. Ajit Narayanan, how easy or difficult is it to have this integrated ecosystem in place, according to you?
Yeah, I think the NDHM, of course, is I think the right step at the right time. I would say, the basic infrastructure for it is in place. There has been success with our payments and everything else that has happened in the past. But I think from a healthcare standpoint of view, I think it is still early days, right? While what is commendable is the ecosystem, the government, everybody thinking of the target state of digital healthcare ecosystem. Whether it is the next 2 years, 5 years, I'm not pretty sure about that. I don't think it will be that soon. The right steps are there. So we are starting with what? We are starting with a simple doctor registry, facility registry to start off with, right? Because today there is nobody who gives you that. Then it moves on to the patient health records, and we are going to a consent system, right? Which basically allows multiple healthcare providers to actually seamlessly exchange the patient's data for healthcare. The data, of course, belongs to the patient in all of these use cases. And from there on, we are talking about a connected telemedicine protocol. By the way, tomorrow, I mean, we will be submitting a proposal of how that telemedicine ecosystem should look in the scope of NDHM, etc. Similarly, the more connected ecosystems of pharmacy, etc., will start to play out. I think so. The steps are in the right place. I think the intention of the players in the private and the public space is the right thing. We will get there for sure. I'm probably guessing between a 5 to 10 year time frame. I think we should see a pretty smooth ecosystem like we have today in digital payments, where I think we probably have one of the smoothest digital payments in the world. Right? I think I can see that happening in the medium term.
Mr. Abhinav, what, according to you, from the pharmacy or the e-pharmacy space could be the key requirements or the need of the hour when you look at the digital health mission?
Put this in black and white, I think that would be one thing from a regulatory framework perspective, right? To put it in black and white, what's right, what's not. That would be one of the things. And like Ajit mentioned, right, the interplay of various entities has to be enabled so that you can marry the demand with the supply. As I said, it's a complicated ecosystem compared to most other ecosystems, because the consumer and the demand originator, they are two different entities. They don't even talk to each other more often than not, right? They are two totally unrelated people. And NDHM can actually bring these entities together, and then letting various players, be it pharmacies, be it the distribution networks, be it the hospitals or the pharma companies, right, to be able to tap into this data, at least at an aggregated level, if not at a patient level, would allow every stakeholder in this ecosystem to basically make their decisions based on this aggregated data. Today, this data is spread across the entire spectrum of these entities, and so nobody is able to make optimum decisions. So the problem is that people need data to make decisions, and the data is spread across these various entities who don't talk to each other. NDHM brings all of these things together. If the protocols allow various entities to tap into this aggregated view, they will be able to take optimal decisions in their particular domains, and that will finally benefit everyone in the ecosystem. Today, the entire cost of it, or all the inefficiency that exists in the system, the person who bears the cost of it is the end user, the patient, you and me, right? We bear the cost of the inefficiency that exists in the system. If each of the entities made to or provided with enough data to make their decisions optimally, the final benefits of it will reach the 1.3 billion people that we have in the country. So that's what I would hope, as things pan out with NDHM. That's what I would hope. These things are enabled in a secure way, of course, and it is a very sensitive data, so it has to be done in a secure way.
Before I come to Mr. Agarwal for some closing comments, I want to come to you, Mr. Roy, to understand the kind of role that the partnership between a private and a public sector will really, help this overall digital health mission. Mr. Roy?
Yeah. So I would talk from a pharma industry perspective, and that is where, collaborating with the hospitals is going to be very useful. So with the government hospitals, if we create linkages, pharma companies, if they create linkages, that is going to give very efficient service to the hospitals, as well as it will also help the pharma companies in distributing products more appropriately. So that is something which will be very useful. Second thing is, on the stage 4 clinical trial, as we sometimes call it, that products which has been in the market after clinical trial, but we want real world evidence to further increase the efficacy of the products, and that is where having various new digital solutions which are now available for clinical trials, which can be extended, and digital clinical trial solutions which can also be extended for post new products, means products which are in commercial stage, to further increase the efficacy and personalize the dosage. Those are the things which will be very useful. So, and that is where government collaboration with private enterprises would help, and having the digital records and health records of each individual, and government is planning or has thoughts in that direction, that would be extremely useful.
All right, coming to you, Mr. Agarwal, to help summarize what this session has really brought for our audiences. Of course, the main topic of discussion has been unlocking India's digital health potential, and we've heard some very interesting, personalities from the space on this panel. So, Mr. Agarwal, if you can just help summarize the session for us.
Thank you, Priya. And first of all, thank you to all the panelists, right? I wish this was like for many more hours. There's been so much of insight. Listen, one of the core Google missions is to improve healthcare across the world. And the way Google is operating is that we are actively working on different aspects, as we heard here. That this is a very, very vast, complex, regulated space, but it affects all the 7+ billion people in the world, right? So our mission really is to be able to improve the quality of research, patient care, understanding diseases better, being able to ensure that people are able to get medicines when things like the pandemic happen, and we have some very, very good examples over the last 1 year. For example, Google Workspace and Google Meet, the platform that we're using right now, has been used for remote consultation for hundreds and thousands and millions of hours, right? We brought in, for example, AI in a very simple way. We had closed captioning capabilities to digitize all conversations, something that the telehealth teams really benefited from. If you look at Google Docs, for example, there was massive amount of patient visit information that was able to be recorded on those. Similarly, Google Forms was a very common way in which scheduling visits happen. And all of these tools, interestingly, if I look at HIPAA as a standard, are HIPAA compliant out of the box. So they meet the stringent regulatory requirements, and we're working towards making sure that the NDHM requirements are met too. Very interestingly, we also announced last year that we'll spend about $100 million US dollars in Amwell, which is the leading provider of teleconsultation, to accelerate the adoption of such platforms globally. In summary, the way I'd like to put this is, whether you want to drive new digital patient experiences, whether you want to use insights to improve healthcare delivery that many of you are doing, whether you want to advance research, drug discovery, and distribution at scale, I think the core part of it is this has become very, very technology centric. Whether it's AI, whether it's data, whether it's APIs, interoperability, I think the evolution of standards will happen. And we are here to help. And finally, one of the things I'd really like to do very soon, on March 30th, it's National Doctors' Day in most parts of the world. In India, we celebrate it on July 1st. I think all of us can certainly appreciate the work and efforts world over and in India that all the healthcare fraternity, including all of you and your organizations, have done. So on behalf of Google, on behalf of Your Story, we'd really like to thank all of you, right, for the tremendous work that you've all done. So really thank you, and thank you for being part of this panel too.
Thank you very much for all your time and all the very insights. I think all our viewers have gained a lot of insight from this very interesting panel, and especially with digital health gaining prominence and importance in our lives. I think this panel discussion has been the most insightful for all of us here. Thank you very much for being a part of this panel.